Good morning, everybody. We are gathered here today for another episode of Coffee with Friends, where we're going to discuss stereotyping, both within and without religious groups, and how that affects the way that we look at the world. I am joined by three other people. Slew, who was here last month for a conversation about stereotyping and is from an independent fundamentalist Baptist church, and Ryan, who is an ex-JW, and Evan. I can't remember what religious group Evan was. Evan will have to tell us later. Just a disclaimer before we begin this live stream: may discuss trauma of all sorts to include all types of abuse. Viewers and listeners may find it unsettling and triggering. The guests on our live streams reflect a diverse set of values, morals, and ethics that may not reflect the morals, values, and ethics of the Misfit Amish. If this live stream causes you distress, please seek support from your trusted folks and qualified mental health professionals as needed, and cease listening until you are ready to hear again. With that being said, thank you to our Patreons and to the Misfit Amish for supporting these live streams. Say good morning to Slew.
Morning.
Good
Yourselves.
morning.
Ryan, and Evan. If each of you would like to give a brief introduction of yourself, starting with Slew.
Oh boy. So I don't know how brief.
30 seconds.
I've been on here
You get
before.
30 seconds.
Okay.
Starting now.
Independent fundamentalist Baptist, and I don't know. I don't know. I'm a Satanist now. There's a lot of things in between. Ask me questions, I guess. Other than that,
There you
to the
go.
next person. I'm
Sounds good. All right,
still
Ryan.
waking up.
I'm actually still waking up myself, and I mean from my religious indoctrination. I am Ryan, a former Jehovah's Witness. And yes, I'm kind of feeling my way blindly through this world, realizing that everything that was fed to me as a kid is not what it seems. So, yeah, you get to watch me on my journey from misled to now trying to maybe help others get unmisled with me. Yeah, that's me.
I mean, yeah, that sounds wonderful. How about you, Evan?
I'm Evan Jones. I am a survivor of the independent fundamentalist movement. I have been out for 11 years now. I am the executive director of the Vashti Initiative, which is an organization that seeks to help people who are processing spiritual trauma and religious abuse. And I am just very excited to be here. I love working with Mary and everything that they do.
Thank you, Evan. So with that being said, so last month we kind of left off on we were discussing, Slew and I really discussed some of the stereotyping that we held within our religious groups. So I wanted to hear from more people like did y'all have stereotypes inside of the Jehovah's Witnesses, or did you experience stereotypes, Evan, in the independent fundamentalist movement? Are there any that come to mind?
Of those outside of our group?
No, when you were in the group and you were participating and you were a believer, were there things that you stereotype people? Either people within the group, because typically we held the belief of to be born Amish is a privilege, right? And so to be of the world, we just don't know. We just don't know. It's the worldly people, they're all out there, they're drinking, smoking,
Right.
drugs and alcohol. They're just so worldly. We just don't know.
There's lots of that in the JW for certain. like the JWs themselves, I think that even y'all, maybe if you didn't have the indoctrination you did, you would look at the Jehovah's Witnesses and think like, oh, they're meek, they're mild mannered, they pay attention to all the laws of society. When they go into places, they leave it looking better than how it was even found. They are just the perfection. Um, Again, loving, kind. They just want to share their message of eternity with the world because that's how much they care about you. And hey, that sounds great. Like those kind of stereotypes, like they sound great on the surface, but inside it kind of removes who you are as a person. Like you don't get to be your true self because you're trying to live up to these standards of this perfect JW stereotype. It's really harmful, quite frankly.
It
Sounds
really is.
good, but it's actually horrible to live that life.
Would you say that it creates bias?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because if, say, if I'm in a group of friends and I'm the only one who's more of myself, maybe I dress more colorfully, I have brighter lips, whatever it might be, if I'm breaking those stereotypical standards, I'm marked. I'm seen as different. I might even be seen as bad association because I could be closer to the worldly. Like we use that word also, worldly. I could be more closely associated to worldly people because of my demeanor. So
Well,
horrible.
well, and did you have like different, like for example, so like there's like certain types of Amish people that we would look at them and we would say they're so worldly, but isn't it really Dutch? And what we would say is they're not really Amish.
Oh, I mean, we would just judge people by like the way they dress. I mean, you're constantly judging people as much as you pretend that you don't judge people because you're supposed to see all people as equal. Lies. That is a lie.
Wow.
You're always constantly judging people, determining if they're good association because everything you do can be seen as something that you can now get
Well,
marked for. You could be blood guilty for doing.
judge the sin, not the sinner, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you wish and that's such a bad statement, like saying too, right?
Uh, what
It's
about
always it's always interesting to me. I mean, these terms, they worldly is a term that I hear consistently across different groups. I hear it in those who are from Hasidic Jewish backgrounds. I hear it from people from fundamentalists, JW, and there is always that term, that fear of that outside creating that us versus them mentality. But I think there's
Yeah.
also creates an unconscious bias within ourselves about ourselves, because even if you know that even if you have the courage to be yourself in that environment, there's still a self-hatred, I think, a lot of times that comes along with it because of that unconscious bias being conditioned.
Yeah.
If you act this way, do these things, you're this person. And it's hard to get rid of that stigma.
I used to
what
do that
about
to myself all the time, judge myself to other people. Why can't I
Mhm.
just be happy with being more plain? Why can't I be happy with not talking to kids at school? Cat attack. The
oh
cat has
man,
something
we
to
gotta
say. The cat will
the
not be
cat
denied.
the cat has something to weigh in on. I hear this. Yeah.
You judge me because of my fur. Okay,
Right.
this is just not
It's the
right.
But
fur. We
I
just
feel
can't do
like
this.
that's kind of what these religions do, though. They kind of set up a hierarchy system to judge things off of and try to
Mhm.
set some kind of impossible bar for yourself that you never are able to achieve. A lot like narcissists do for people. But yeah,
Well, I mean, I've said it frequently privately. I don't know if I've said it publicly, but I do feel like in many ways the church employs the narcissist tendencies,
Mhm.
there's a
regardless.
there's a good like a good YouTube channel called Theremin Trees that goes into a whole series on narcissistic, like the narcissistic god of the Abrahamic religion and how
I
those
think I
things pertain
followed
to that.
them.
Yeah.
And
I have
yeah,
to look it up.
but like what really struck me as odd too was like I was working through things with a narcissistic parent, my mental health and everything. I was working through things with that, and at the same time I was working through religious trauma, and it's like these two things are related. Like there's no there's like no doubt about it whenever it comes down to the
Hmm.
things that help you to come out of those, and the effects that they have on you and everything, and even some of the tactics implemented and everything, it's very similar from my experience.
I
So
agree.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think that also another thing is like when we think about um, our experiences, and I don't know if y'all had the concept of original sin, but if you had the concept of original sin, that also leads to that self-judgment and that self-hatred. And when you are in a place where you experience abusive behaviors and have abusive experiences, it automatically lends to and contributes to creating a shame-based response to that abuse. And when that happens, it makes it very difficult for somebody to be able to feel like you are a healthy, happy, and whole person.
Wow.
Especially when you start implementing ideology about everything happening for a reason and it being part of God's plan and all of that.
Right. You add the
You've got-
spiritual bypassing and the spiritual disillusion, and then it just kind of amps
Right.
everything up to the 10th degree, because now it's your spirituality and you're blocking someone from access the greater divine. Like, that's a fucking
Yep.
ugh.
So one of our listeners says, I think the mainstream church nurtures and creates narcissists. It's a place to grow wolves.
It's
They
very
model
centric.
themselves after it. I mean, they present a
Yeah.
narcissistic God that everything revolves around them. Literally, that's the whole thing. And there's blood rituals, blood sacrifices having to be made for this bloodthirsty God. And they're implementing all of these rules that constantly change, because it's not, even though they say that they made this perfect thing, then they say, well, I don't like that anymore. So I'm going to make rules, and I'm going to do this and that and it's all to just manipulate somebody.
So
and then go farther into the book, and it says to model yourself after the God.
Yeah.
I mean, that,
or these great
me,
men that God chose.
that explains
right?
a lot that we see with all of that, you know?
Yeah, it's very sadistic. I mean, when we read it, especially when the way that it's been interpreted, the Bible has been interpreted and used, and it doesn't, whether a person uses the Bible or not. I think people can use the Bible and they can find good things in there if that's what they choose. But I just think the way that the Bible has been interpreted, really going back through to the Catholic Church in the early years, as the Catholic Church started to get control in places like Europe. And ever since then, it goes right in with that hierarchy, with the same way that people had their kings and their rulers. They had to establish that hierarchy in order to establish control. And we see it in churches and groups all across the world today.
So
I mean, I think Paul really implemented that into I mean, his manipulation of the New
Don't
Testament
get
and
me
everything
started
as
on
well.
Paul.
History,
God,
if we
Paul.
want to
not-
go
I
into
fuck-
it, yeah.
I- yeah.
we'll
He's
have
the
a whole
salesman of
other
Christianity.
yeah. No. But let me
The
just
shit show
point
Paul.
this out for those who may not understand this. So part of what happens and what I see happening and what I've both seen and experienced happening is that people take this book and they base themselves, they're supposed to model themselves off of this deity that is in fact operating as what appears to be a narcissist. And then they stereotype that as good. So
They
when
normalize that, yeah.
yeah.
Exactly.
So when you're within those groups and this is considered good and you're being told this is good, and that happens to you and it harms you, how do you respond?
Oof. You probably take whatever the situation is, you probably take the blame on yourself. Whatever happened, it's your fault. You must have caused it. You brought it upon yourself. At least that's, hey, Kevin. At least that's
Hey.
for me, generally what happened. Like, I would just see it as like, damn, I'm just a freaking F up.
You
Well,
either become the abused or the abuser. That's all that's
Yeah.
forced in that situation. You have to choose one of those two roles.
okay.
I feel like my responses were normally whatever I learned from the trauma and shit that like came from that to begin with. Those feelings to begin with. Like,
Yep. Yep.
So those might even be childish responses of
Mhm.
lashing out or whatever, or
Well,
but not childish in that sense. But you know what I mean? Like,
so one of the things that happens, and I think what you're referring to, Slew, is like when we have trauma responses to things, what happens is we are reliving traumatic events, whether we cognitively recognize it or
Right.
not. Secondly, the responses that we give may be based or indicated by the age that we were when that trauma was originally happening. So it's
yeah,
not
it's
necessarily
emotionally stunted
Yeah.
things that
it's
are childlike in that way because you
Yeah.
never really grew in that aspect of things because
Your
you
critical
never got
taught
taught
skills are
anything to
stunted.
we don't
do
Yeah.
anything better
we
than
don't
that.
have
Yeah.
we don't have a platform from within which to
No.
respond in a different way.
Like even self-soothing and shit. You don't
Mhm.
learn to do
Yeah,
any
you
of
don't get
that.
that.
It's
No.
no.
You don't even get hobbies like I'm sure even in your situations, like Mary, I just guarantee you probably had no time for hobbies or to do anything personal.
Okay,
Am
no,
I wrong or
stereotyping. Remember,
and that
We're-
is a stereotype.
that
Yeah,
is a
and that is a
stereotype.
stereotype. For
Okay,
us, we didn't have time. It was not allowed. You don't have time.
okay.
Everything should be about
I feel
dedicating your
like
life to your work, your God, or
Mhm.
whatever.
So everything should be dedicated to your work, and you should be being productive. But I did, in fact, in my book, I write about this, and I share a drawing that I drew when I was like
That's awesome.
really young, because one of my uncles taught me how to draw some things like a bird on a log, and I did that. But yes, like by and large, our value is productivity based. So like other things that I did that were really soothing was like crocheting, or like I did embroidery stitching. I embroidered a
but
full set of
okay.
pillowcases as a teenager. Like I had some creative outlet, but not really.
Well, were you allowed to do
Yeah.
those things for yourself, or did those have to be a specific way for a specific,
I
in
was
to
allowed to
glorify
put
a deity or
whatever
something?
I was allowed to put
There's
whatever
that
I
too.
wanted on that, but it just had to be within the parameters that were set by the rules.
Right.
See, that's interesting because so I was the only thing I was allowed to do. So I'm open with this, and I've been on your podcast before. So I'm a transgender person. So I was assigned a different sex at birth, and because of that, because of my assigned gender, I was only allowed to do certain things. I was allowed to crochet and knit. I was very horrible
Right.
at it, but that was all I was allowed to do. And so if I could have had my choice for hobbies, they would have been very different. I would have done some more what I would consider masculine or not even masculine. I would have played sports. I wasn't allowed to play sports because my gender role in our group, I wasn't allowed to play sports. So I think it's interesting with hobbies. Like there were things that I did find that were self-soothing, but today when I try to do them, they're no longer soothing for me because they were only things I was allowed to do. So I think that's interesting.
Because of the amount
Yeah.
of
Dang.
control that was
Like a
stereotyped as
double-edged
being
sword in
good.
a way.
And now
Yeah.
that you're recognizing that amount of control and the mind control that comes with it no longer feels soothing.
Isn't
Exactly.
that the weird thing too? Like whenever you hear these people that are still in religion, maybe the religion that you were in, talking about how good this religion makes them feel and everything, it's like, yeah, that did that for me too then, but not now. Like
Yeah.
there's this weird
Yeah.
disconnect there that is hard to even
I
explain
never
to
even
somebody
like y'all
still
are
in.
making me think about stuff I hadn't thought about for so long. I'm like,
Well,
wowsies. Like I
because
used to self-soothe, like because we're talking about coping mechanisms, and you don't,
Mhm.
maybe you get a coping mechanism, but it's within these parameters, and it has to be da 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 da, following all these guidelines or these rules, and
right.
can't take too much
It's
time. But
always
like I used to dance and make my own choreographed. Like I'm not a dancer, but I had a lot of energy, and it was a great way to get it all out. And I watch like the TikTok dances, and I'm like, I would love that. Like, where is she? Where is the girl who would self-soothe and do these dances like to enjoy her? Like, I don't know. Like, you guys are making me think about stuff. Sorry, I was just like, wow.
Well, and
well,
furthermore, like in regards to that, so for a very long time I didn't sew and I didn't crochet, but It came around. Like, I've been out
Right.
for those who don't know, I've been out for 19 years. And so for a very long time, I didn't sew, I didn't crochet, I didn't do any of that. But part of what happened to me is that in my journey, I started exploring other creative outlets. And when I started exploring other creative outlets, it was like, okay, you know what? I want to sew. I want to sew my child clothes. And that's how it kind of started, is like I started designing clothing for my child that were sensory friendly to my child, that were comfortable for them. And because of that, like I started like really understanding that yes, there's this element of control that automatically makes me not want to. And sometimes I go periods where it's really difficult to do it,
Right.
and then I don't do it, but I do in phases still sew. And what I do is I actually sew things that I want to sew. I get to pick things to sew that I love,
Mm-hmm.
things that don't cause me distress, things that are, in fact, like being even more creative than just your basic whatever it was within the parameters. Or, and the same way with crocheting.
I
That's
mean,
right.
I feel like I did that, like I with guitar and stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
I went in and out of these phases too. It was like I'd feel like all I wanted to listen to was gospel music for a while, which makes me just kind of repulsed now. But yeah,
I used to have a small little, like I had a liking, but then once I like came out, like really realized, I was like,
Yeah.
damn, like that's
Yeah.
like I want to love it because I
I
like
feel
the,
like
it's
everything.
specifically made to pick you up. Like they have those
Hmm.
chords and that
I
shit
feel
that
like
does it for you,
everything
gets you
then
off.
was just so restrictive. Like you couldn't go outside of that box of things, right?
Hmm.
Because that was the worldly thing, like we were talking about earlier. It
Mhm.
was you're to be in the world, not of the world, is how my church would put it.
Yeah. And tell me
Um,
how that makes sense. Please, please tell me
yeah,
how you live in a world, but you're not a part. Like, stop.
Right.
No, I'm not saying it to you, but like now that I'm
So
older, I'm like,
so
who the fuck are these
here's
people? Like, what are they
right.
doing to us?
Here's another question that I have about that. So, if you're supposed to be in the world but not of the world, which we also held that belief, but if you're supposed to be in the world but not of the world, okay. So, how do you make connections with people that are of the world when all you think about them is that they do these things that you have labeled as so bad and you don't know, but they're probably going to hell?
Hmm.
Yeah, you don't. Or if you do, it's very contentious. Like in school, every day I would do this, like putting on a new personality, like go to school and do the witness thing. And, if you really care about your friends, you're going to tell them about the good news. Like that's when you really love somebody, when you witness to them and you try to bring them into the truth. So I would do
Can
that. Like I'd like, if I really love them, I'd be witnessing. Oh my God, I must not love them. What's wrong with me?
Ryan,
Sorry, y'all.
I'm gonna need
Right.
you to
Okay.
record that
Yeah.
voice and send it to the person who keeps sending me letters about the good news.
Oh, sure, absolutely. You let me know. I got you. I got the voices. I got plenty of voices. Oh man.
I mean, I like all of that goes back to that stereotyping. Like we were trying to save the world based on our stereotypes of the world, and we reacted to people based on that too. And that savior mentality is so hard to break. I think part of that is, being white in America, and part of it's being, if you're part of any kind of Christian group in America, you're going to have that savior mentality. But especially in these environments where it was us versus them and this set apart society, you very much buy into that idea of that savior. I have the good news and everyone else needs it.
So,
Can I
thank you.
comment on that? What I want to, if you don't mind, and I think part of that too is like that whole savior personality thing. And I don't know, because I'm again just somebody waking up, but I feel like for me, and I don't know, but part of that altruistic nature is maybe part of like a neurodivergence where I feel like I constantly have to fix things or even out
Mm.
things. And And I think that
I
sometimes those religions play into that for people.
see
They make them feel like they're doing something good when
that's
you're
but
Oh
this is
yeah.
where I relate to this. I feel like this is the narcissist and the caretaker. Like that's the
Mm.
caretaker thing that you've been groomed to do through your religion
Yeah,
for
see? And I don't know how to separate. And what's the like, how do I know the difference? How do I know I'm not being I'm going too far. I gotta protect them. Like it's not my job.
because
Like
Okay.
it's
if you're
so
going beyond
hard.
yourself to the point to where it's affecting your mental state and your well-being
Mhm.
and everything, then you're doing too much. You're not
Doing
taking
too
care of
much,
yourself
Ryan.
first. You need to take care of yourself first, and then you're able to help other people. And
Yeah.
that's a hard thing to learn whenever you've been indoctrinated into that mindset that you put everyone else first and yourself last.
Okay.
Thank you
Sorry
Thank
for
for that.
that.
thank
No,
you,
thank you.
all of
This
you.
is
No,
helpful
all
to
of you
me.
made wonderful points. Now, I'm going to say this as somebody who in 2004 spoke publicly about the abuse I experienced in my Amish community and the way that people responded and the way that people still do respond is quite frankly often tied to that savior complex. It's this idea, this stereotyping, this mentality of like, well, you just need healing or, well, I'm going to save you. And then when they realize that I have like complex PTSD that doesn't just go away,
No.
then it's like, well, you're just not a faithful believer or whatever. I mean, whatever. But my point in bringing that out is like, thank you for bringing up the whole like savior complex thing because what I see frequently happening is that people want to help other people, but because of the fact that we've experienced so much stereotyping and our actions are garnered by so much bias, inadvertently many people end up creating more harm to already traumatized survivors
Yeah.
of abuse. And what they do is rather than empowering survivors of abuse, what they do is they tell them what to do. They tell them where to go. They tell them how to raise their
Mm.
kids. Like I had people literally telling me, you have to spank your kid. And I did spank my kid, and I deeply, deeply regret it. And knowing everything that I know now today, I would never spank my kid. But I had people sitting me down, preaching to me for over an hour. And no, these weren't even Christians. Telling me about how my kid is out of control. And the only thing that's wrong with my kid is that I am not spanking them enough.
Oh boy.
So
That's
when we
deep, right?
start talking about stereotyping and bias and harm being caused by it, part of that is that.
Mm-hmm.
Part
Can
of
I
that is people who sit there and they say, I'm going to rescue these people who have
Right. In their
experienced
tower.
abuse, right? I'm going to rescue these people. And what I've personally experienced is that people try to rescue me. They tell me what to do, they tell me where to go, they tell me how to live my life, and they judge every single thing that I do. Every word that comes out of my mouth is judged.
Yep.
And it's constantly just not quite enough. So,
does it seem like too the more that you share about these things too, the more stereotypes and shit get thrown in because then they think they know you or something? Like
oh yeah,
that
people
weird thing. Like
people
Mm.
think they know me because they saw Sins of the Amish, or people think they know
yeah.
me because they read my book. You don't know me.
Mm.
You know what
Yeah.
I choose to
You
tell
know
you.
a brief
And it's
yeah, you
also
know a
those
brief part of me.
those
That's
parasocial like connections that people do like to somebody like yourself, or even I'm not sure what you all do all the time, like on camera, but you tell your story and people start to think that they know you, right? They probably have this idea of that they've built in their head. But yeah, there's so much more that we don't get to put out there on camera
I mean
about
and
Well,
ourselves.
and like here's the thing is being born Amish and what I experienced as an Amish person and deconstructing from Amish indoctrination and all of that, that is one part of me. That is one part of me. That is
You're
not
not one dimensional,
I
yeah,
am
you know?
multidimensional.
right.
I am not
Right.
just one dimensional.
And
And when
Amish
you
on a
do that,
monolith.
And when you do that to survivors of abuse, you are literally saying they are not more than their abuse.
So
Mm,
I can
It's a,
be,
good point.
the way I see it, I can be sympathetic towards you because I've went through similar things, right? And I can have empathy towards you because
Right.
I haven't went through the same things that you've
right.
went through. And
Right.
but like I think it's that combination of things rather than this thing. I feel like there's no empathy behind stereotypes. Like it's bypassing that. You
Ooh,
are never even
it
thinking about
is.
the person themselves or what they've went through or
It
what
dehumanizes
what
people.
if what if you were in these shoes? What if it doesn't put you in it? Yeah, it
But
definitely dehumanizes people.
it
Well
does
said.
dehumanize people. I mean, and one of our listeners says we need to learn to set and enforce boundaries in our society, and I think
That's a
that's
good
true.
point.
And I think that goes right back to that savior complex. When you are operating in a role where vulnerable people come to you, how do you best support them? And I'm telling you right now that when you empower people and when you give people access to resources and support, that is how you best support them.
Hmm.
When you give people the ability to make decisions for themselves, even to the point of where they make decisions that you wouldn't make, because here's the thing, you are not the same people and you are not in control of those people. You need to empower them.
Mm.
I mean, and Evan, is that true? Like when it comes to you run an organization, so let's hear from Evan.
No, I agree with you. No, absolutely. I think in general, I mean, there's stereotypes about spiritual trauma and what that means. And I don't know how many times I have to hear someone be like, oh, you got your feelings hurt at church. Like that's it, so dismissive. And so, um, yeah, the only way to combat that is through empowering people. And we empower people by teaching them how to make decisions for themselves, how to think for themselves. We can't come in with set ideas and guidelines of how they should react or be because that's
Mm.
exactly what they came from.
And everybody responds to trauma differently.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's
We
layers to this shit.
dehumanize them. We
There's
dehumanize
layers.
them. Yeah, there's
So
entire layers to this. And so it goes back to stereotyping, bias, which creates inherent discrimination, which creates harm.
Mm-hmm.
I have
Absolutely.
a weird one that I'm kind of still processing right now because I had this happen from a friend recently. I didn't ever really look at this as stereotyping before, but now it's kind of like looking at way to me now. But like my so because I came from an evangelical church and stuff, he kind of tied this thing of my protesting of the church and religion. He's tying that together as like proselytizing, like I did while I was still in the church. And it hit me like I couldn't figure out why this was like it triggered me for a minute and like I couldn't figure out what the fuck is going on in my head right now. Why is this so offensive to me? And I started breaking it down. It's like this is putting like abusive ideology that leads to trauma on the same scale as speaking out against like abuse and being in an activist type setting. And that is just so fucked up. Like, but it's been normalized into society to fucking think that way.
And would you
Yeah.
say that felt a little bit gaslighty?
It did, and I had to stop because this is my friend, and I know he didn't mean anything by it. I've known him forever, and I know he didn't initially, like, but at the same time, it's like, wow, like this is where we're at.
Yeah. Society tends to think, and here's another thing that society tends to think is that there's a stereotype, right? In general, have you heard of the stereotype of Satanists sacrificing babies?
Well,
Yeah,
that's just truth. Sorry. Excuse me. I just have
that
to.
same
We know that that's
I
what they
mean, but
do.
I got a letter.
So it must be true.
that same stereotype has been used for like Jews and stuff too. Like that's an
Oh,
anti-Semitic thing as well,
yes,
and that
it really
which is
is.
it's so funny that like how any Christian can like try to distance themselves from anti-Semitism whenever that's their whole religion based off of that. That they are the sect of Judaism that rejected the other sects. Like, how do
Yep.
you ever distance yourself from that when your whole religion's based off of it?
And you're all
Ooh-wee.
Jewish apostates. Oops, my
Yeah.
bad. Did I go there?
Oh, she went there. But
I did.
that's a very good point. Most of the horrible like new age spiritism stuff stems from like some kind of anti-Semitic talking point. And I like this is all news to me within the past like year. Like I had no idea. I had no idea. It's wild.
There were little anti-Semitic and like racist things and stuff spread through our church, like that I didn't realize until later on it was like propaganda. Like there's just certain
Yeah,
phrases
propaganda.
and things that fit with different groups like that, and yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
it's creepy how
Propaganda
much of that.
is a very good way to put it. It's a stereotypical propaganda.
I think
And we're trained monkeys to believe a certain way. Anyway,
I think some of our listeners may not quite understand what anti-Semitic is. Would one of you care to explain that?
I mean, I don't remember exactly how the term came about, but I believe it was a white guy, and it's really even kind of an anti-Semitic description. I even think, if I remember it right, but it's against Jewish people specifically, and I used to think it was against like all Semitic people, but it's actually specifically against, not against, but it's about the hatred and prejudice of Jewish people specifically.
There's always kind of been that thing within the sects and everything, but the like World War II brought up a bunch of the anti-Semitism and everything because Hitler was using Jews as slaves and putting them into concentration camps and stuff, and horrible shit was going on. But yeah, that shit influenced thing that was actually based off of the United States form of slavery and stuff. Hitler got his ideas from us. So
is that gross?
yeah, people need to look into their history more than what they do.
Yeah. So I'd encourage you, if you don't understand what anti-Semitic means, to go actually look it up and find out what it is and what the actual definition is.
I mean, and fascism and stuff. If you look into that, there's Jason Stanley, I believe, is the name of there's a professional in that particular study and everything that gives good seminars on that sort of thing.
Yeah. But going back to like religious stereotyping, like with that being said, so one of the things that Slew had shared last month was that inside of his church, they held a very specific view of Amish people, like towards other groups. Like other groups were more favorable or like less favorable, like in each, like in the churches that we were in. Did you guys have that? Like where some other groups were more favorable than others were?
I mean, we did definitely. Any person who had Christian roots was more favorable than those who weren't. A person who was Muslim or even a person who was Jewish was going to immediately rolled out. But those that might follow the Bible, we actually took our idea for what we called soul winning from the Jehovah's Witnesses, which is where you're going out witnessing or visiting. So we thought that we thought the Jehovah's Witnesses were good, but they were just misinformed. And the same thing with the Amish. We thought the Amish are well intentioned, but they don't have the truth. Whereas again, like someone who was Muslim was just, they were an infidel, they were against God. So there was also a hierarchy. We didn't believe that someone who was Amish or JW, I don't know if it's just appropriate to say JW, Jehovah's Witness, was,
JW is fine.
We thought they might could find the truth, they might could get to heaven, but probably weren't. But they were at least in a better place than some of the other groups.
So,
I think we kind of had a
rating?
similar thing, but
I'm sorry. So what I'm hearing is that y'all rated each group on the likelihood of going to heaven or hell.
I wouldn't say it wasn't like a formal rating, but we
but
talked
it's an
about it a lot.
idea, right?
It's
You
an
had ideas.
informal
I feel like
rating.
I feel like they should have a website, like review, like each denomination just have their own website reviewing the
On
other
a scale
ones.
of 1 to 5,
Yeah.
how
Who's
likely
going
are
to
you to
heaven?
die
Who
in
knows?
Armageddon?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Most likely to
that's
die.
funny.
Of course, that was all counted out if you were queer or LGBTQ.
Oh,
So
hell yeah.
you could be, if you thought you were
What?
a
You
gay
weren't allowed to
Baptist,
do
you
that.
might as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, okay. Yeah, I think the website would be a great idea. We should have a website. I really feel like that would be a wonderful way of like seeing some of these loosely held and enforced beliefs and stereotypes that we don't really see. Like we can discuss the underlying theology until we're blue in the face, but I mean, like talking about the effects of that and the stereotyping and how that affects how we look at the world around us and how that
Yeah.
affects our ability to make connections and build connections that mean something with us, like with other people. Like the website would be really helpful. It's just a thought.
There's probably something out there we can just
We should Google it
model
when we
after.
get done here.
Yeah. I have a question.
Denomination.
If you guys don't mind, what do you think about like let's do it. Let's just rank every denomination we can find.
rankings.
1 to 5 on a scale of hell to happily ever after life. Which
Oh my.
We can call it the Denomination Domination Championships. We can like have a whole.
We can have a
event about it,
contest.
like, yeah.
that like a religious pissing contest. I think that sounds fun.
I mean, it's already happening.
Right.
Like we'd just be putting it on the internet so it's accessible. Right. But anyways, you have a question. Sorry.
I was just curious what you all thought about, because stereotypes, again, these ideas are all kind of new to me to kind of flesh out and realize like where I stand with things. But how do you feel about, because I was thinking about it this morning, good stereotypes, what people would say are a good stereotype, because I even think that good stereotypes can be harmful now that I was like thinking about it.
I actually purchased a book last week. It's called Building with Dust and Ashes. It's written by an ex-Mennonite teenager who held a stereotype of Amish men are good. She was preyed upon by an Amish man. She was preyed upon violently abused by an Amish man. Which, for the record, he's in prison now for ex-Amish man. But because of that stereotype, she thought he was going to be safe for her.
Right, exactly.
And he writes about it in the book.
But that brings up a good point. Like women inside of like let's just say specifically Jehovah's Witnesses, because it is what I'm familiar with. You would just assume every single Jehovah's Witness who participates at the meeting, who goes out on field service, who might have privileges inside of the Kingdom Hall. Like there's all these certain things that will tell you, oh, this is a good man. Like you don't know nothing about him personally. You might have went on one date, but because of A, B, C, and D, he's a good guy. You're good to go. It doesn't matter about anything else. He's going to treat you good because he's a good witness.
Well,
And-
I feel like that's the difference between like the mindset that they're in, that they think religion rules morals, like that there's no moral values outside of their religion, that their book is based around these morals and that's the only thing that matters. Like it's such a narrow-minded thing, and then it allows for all of this nasty shit we were talking about earlier with a bloodthirsty God and all of this that they're supposed to be modeling themselves after. Is that really moral? Like if they took it out of the context of religion, if it was in just a plain context of anything else in life, and you had somebody just, asking to murder people for you, or to, I don't know, like so many horrible stories, right? And it's like, how does that reflect any kind of morals that we'd have today? But you're saying that that's what we should be basing them off of?
Right.
I mean,
And it
you nailed
doesn't.
it, Slew. It's equating religion to morality, and that's exactly
Yeah.
why we can't get funding for this kind of work, and we can't get help for survive. I mean, look at other groups. We've made so much progress in our services for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and these different groups, and people don't equate spiritual and religious abuse, even though we see people who have their finances drained. We see people who are physically beaten and abused. We see rampant sexual assault. We see educational neglect. We see medical neglect. All of these things are happening, but we can't get anyone to take this field seriously because of the idea of, but they're religious people. This is religion. We can't touch religion. Religion is everything that's good in our society. And I'm not criticizing religion, but I am going to criticize any kind of group that uses their faith or anything to hurt others, and that's what we're seeing in so many different groups.
Thank you, Evan.
Mhm.
That is very
I-
true, and I would verify that, like, rampant sexual assault, like, as some of you know, I did co-write a research study last year wherein we ask people, did you experience CSA? And this is specifically about child sexual abuse. There were Amish, Mennonite, Anabaptist, and other religious groups that participated. And I'm here to say that it happens inside of all religious groups. So when you say it's not my church, I'm here to tell you it is your church. It is every church. There is no group of people that is exempt from it.
All of them.
It is all of
churches
them.
are bastards.
And
Heard it here.
until well, it's not even just churches. It's like, it does
Yeah.
not matter. Wherever you get groups of people, child sexual abuse happens,
Mhm.
because there are always people that are committing crimes, and this happens around the world. It is not just one church. It is not just the Amish church. It
No,
is
but
not
I
just
also here's the thing too. I feel like it takes another group of people to enable that. Even if they aren't involved with it, it takes the other group to enable that. So if they aren't doing it, they're helping it happen still. So
Yep.
it's like, how do you ever avoid that? Like,
by checking your stereotypes.
yeah.
Checking your bias
So
at the
I
door.
wanted to talk about, what about gender? Like, Evan, you'd brought it up a little bit earlier. And
So
I'm
many stereotypes.
non-binary. I go by they, them. And a lot of that came from me, like, trying to break down gender and stuff. And what I knew is that growing up in a religion, because after, like, when I was deconverting, it was a thing of trying to piece back together morals and stuff. Because, like we were talking about, it's a book. But now you've got things outside of that book that you can look towards instead, right? Like empathy, like things that can kind of transcend that and bring you to better judgments and everything. So, like, I had this thing as being assigned male at birth. It felt like I was raised to have this certain mindset to fit in this box.
Mm.
And, like, to be dominant. I always had to be, a dominant, assertive person. And like, this was something weird that I ran into the other day that I never really thought about. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, why does it feel so weird to compliment somebody? And it was because I got, like, this thing pushed on me that men can't compliment each other. I was put into this man box that said you can't compliment other people. That's gay. That's, you'd get made fun of for all of that. And, like, it didn't matter if you're transgender or whatever. They don't think that far into anything. You're either sinning or you aren't. And it's kind of, even in society, that's how it was viewed. It was just, there was gay and straight. Like, for the longest time, that was just what it was. And yeah, so ignorant of shit. But yeah, it got made to where, like, compliments were sexualized almost.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So, are you saying, and are you talking about the box that far too often men are put into this box where it's like, they're men, and they have to be these big, manly men, and they have to conform to what the stereotyped idea of a man is. And
Right.
they have to conduct themselves in a manner that meets the societal expectation of them.
Yeah.
And what that means is that, when Evan was talking about doing like crocheting, like within the parameters, right? Within the parameters that are being set, you are being boxed into being this guy, right? And then they have, I don't know if your church did this, but I really want to know if they did. But they had this thing where they tell men that they just have to fight their lusts, right? Like they really don't have control over it. If they
Yeah.
accidentally rape somebody, it was just because
Yeah.
Satan was tempting them.
Yeah.
Or if they abuse their wife, it's because the devil's in the
No,
house. Or
exactly. And that's the thing.
like
I
demon
would,
possession of the wife. Like so where
this
does
is
that
kind of,
leave you?
this is kind of where I was getting at with all of that too, is like, it makes you feel like a fucking creep just for giving compliments, just for like, if you were compliment a woman or a man or whatever, it just feels creepy all the way around. And it's hard to break through all that. That's one of the struggles that it's hard to put into words.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Ryan, I think you're muted.
Ryan, you're muted.
Thank you. And I think sometimes as a woman or anybody, you probably feel if you're getting complimented, you might be like, oh God, what do they want from me? Like you're like, oh
Yeah, it feels like there's an
shit.
ulterior motive behind it
Mhm.
at all times
Yeah.
because those things have been sexualized. It's weird.
Do you feel dehumanized and objectified at the same time by it? Is that a possibility on the realm of feelings?
Is that me or
Yeah,
Ryan? Yeah.
you, Slew.
Yeah, it feels like I've been used that way and shoved into whatever society has made them feel comfortable putting me in, rather than who I am or what I'm about. I
Messes
like,
with your
and that's,
identity.
yeah,
I'll tell you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Evan.
I was just saying, wandering into this world, coming from a background where I was, raised and lived as a woman in a very gendered, structured world. Everything was based on your gender. The role you got to play in society was based on your gender. I never, had any idea of hope of being anything else. And then now it is very, I run into the compliment thing now. The more I pass, as we call it, or the more masculine I present, the more I run into things where if I give someone a compliment, especially if it's another man, I get a weird look. And it's something that I'm all of a sudden aware of. But it is very different. It's very different to see how people are treated.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, and I will say that in regards to the whole compliments thing, like for me, I'm almost like, wait, what do you want from me?
yeah,
What do you want from me? Why are you saying that? Oh, are you
yeah,
just being creepy? Like, what's really happening here?
Yeah.
Because and here's the other thing that I think like our perspective religions kind of did at some point in time or another. They taught us, or maybe it was our families, I don't know, but they taught us that when somebody compliments us, we should question it because they probably could be related to or tied to manipulation.
Oh, damn. Gosh. I
What?
can't enjoy shit. I'm just saying, like, damn, it's so like you can't. Like I don't even know what to say. I don't even know what to say because I don't know. It's just so wild sometimes.
It always reminds me of this quote about Puritans, but that can really be applied to any of these extreme faiths of like Puritans is the idea that someone somewhere is having fun and not being happy about it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much how it is. Anything that is fun, Christianity or these extreme fractions of these groups are constantly anything that might bring you joy in life is shut down if that joy is not expressly given to you by your leader. not even by God, by whatever leaders in control. They have to say that you can have joy, that you can't, or that you can't.
I mean, the religion Christianity took over a whole artwork movement doing that, trying to take joy out of things, the Gothic era of things, like
Yes.
Right. Like, damn.
it was
I mean-
purposely to just make people feel like shit about themselves so that they'd go into the church.
I mean, we had
like,
dark ages for, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
of their terrible ideologies. It's,
Yeah.
gosh. And I feel like we're headed that direction in this country. Like, if we don't really start dragging our
well,
feet.
they've already
and
found another
digging in.
minority group to pinpoint to fucking blame
Right.
everything on the trans
they're
community
trying
at
to
this
commit
point.
genocide.
Yeah.
Yeah. They are.
Furthermore, yeah, they are trying. Yeah, that part. I can't talk about trans rights today because I will literally sit here and cry. So anyways,
It's a lot. It's a lot. I think we're all going through it right now. The frustration.
But let me segue into, like, I feel like this is a really good place to start talking about, like, if like anybody is experiencing some of these types of stereotypes, what kind of advice do y'all got for them?
Can I give something?
Sure.
Can I give a little anecdote? Just because, again, I was thinking about this subject since you told me about the show, and I was like, well, what do I know about stereotypes? Have I ever experienced this? So at work, I used to work in a hospital, so I work with doctors and nurses all the time. And this one time, this is a bad experience. This one time, and I wasn't woken up at the time, a nurse was telling me an experience that she had. I don't know. I can't remember why she was telling me, but there was a customer service rep, a Black woman, who she was talking to. And she was trying to tell me about, like, she was trying to present a stereotypical angry Black woman to me. And I don't think she knew who I was. So she tried it. And, I don't know how to, I wasn't educated on any of these ideas, but she's telling me her experience. She's like, and she says to me, you know what I'm saying? Like, when Black women do A, B, and C, and I was like, no, what do you mean? And she was like, oh, well, she had this attitude with me. And I said, she works in customer service? And she said, yeah. And I said, oh, so do you like working in customer service? And she was like, no. And I said, right. I said, do you think it's a possibility that maybe she works in customer service and she has to deal with people all the time giving her attitude and not respecting her parameters of her job? There's things she's unable to do for certain people because of her job description. Do you think that maybe there's a possibility you're being judgmental? And I think she was like, as the color drained from her face, I think she realized that I wasn't the one. Like, I'm not the number one. I'm not the two. I ain't the three. So don't try me.
Today's not the day. Not tomorrow either.
This is what
Not
kills me
yesterday.
too, is that, like, that stereotype gets applied to women as well in general. With
And
the
that's
angry,
why I
you know
was
what I mean?
like-
So it's like, how are you not able to
Like,
see
how
that
d-
you're doing that in a different form, but it's the same thing, and it's the same
Exactly.
illogical thinking behind it?
Thank
Like-
you. Thank you. Because if it had been a white woman, you'd probably just, oh, she was being a bitch. But it wouldn't have had anything to do with the stereotypical angry white woman, right? Because that's just not a stereotype.
Yeah.
That's not a
Or
a
we wouldn't have
stereotype that's
talked about
developed.
the white woman tears.
Well,
know?
but here's the thing. If
I
it's a white woman, it would still be that time of the month or something to that effect of it being.
Yeah,
you know what I
you
mean?
could
Like,
probably find
it's
a way
still
around
the
it.
same idiotic stuff
that's-
behind it. That's
But
trying
that's
to.
because of the stereotyping, because of the white woman tears.
Yeah.
So what?
That is
so what
literally
basically-
what that is.
So my advice, I guess, is if you come across that, walk their ass through it and make them feel stupid. Like, I made her feel stupid. I could see that I didn't know how to address it. Like, I could have just, you're racist, and that would have went nowhere, right? Like, it would have just,
You
you're a
can't
bigot.
tell people about themselves like that.
It would not have worked. But this woman tried me. She thought she was going to find a confidant. She did not find a confidant. And if anything, she walked away feeling stupid that she said that shit to the wrong person.
I feel like even if you stand up and just say, you're a fucking bigot, and leave, like, at least you've said something. Like, at least it hasn't been, and maybe enough times of that fucking person having that happen, and somebody say, hey, you're a bigot, and they leave. Like, maybe enough people through their lifetime that'll happen, and they'll finally realize, hey, I'm a bigot. Maybe I should do something about that. Like, you don't know, and I feel like there's a certain amount of like nihilism in atheist communities and stuff that I've witnessed too, that happens that way, where they're like, oh well, aren't going to change their minds anyway, so why even say anything? And it's like, because they aren't going to quit fucking saying anything. That's why.
Right.
Because they won't stop, and they're influencing people outside of just them.
Not even just that. How many people have been killed because of these kinds of stereotypes and bias?
And it's normalizing that shit by allowing that shit to just keep continuing to go unchecked or yeah. Like, why wouldn't you want to say something?
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. I feel like that could be a whole other.
It worked for me.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be a whole other panel discussion.
It really could or should be. I'd be more than welcome to come back for that.
Okay, we'll have to see about that, because I think like this conversation is really, really great to have, but I think really like it's good to take an honest look at like what happened and what we learned and what we see and what we experience and how stereotyping and bias and discrimination is affecting all of that.
And our judgments on people.
I mean, right. Everything. And how do we navigate the world after all of that? And so like, you just
stay inside. That's what I do, Mary. I don't leave my house.
Well, I want to ask Slew and Evan if they have anything they would like to share with anybody who may be experiencing or deconstructing their stereotypes.
For the people deconstructing their stereotypes, I guess it depends on which one. What?
Oh my!
With the religious stereotypes and everything compared to gender stereotypes and all of that, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know, Evan. Do you have something better? Let me come back to that.
You know, I've done a lot of work in this area because I had so many stereotypes and so many ideas, and you know, it's important to learn in these high control groups, whatever you want to call them, a high control group, a cult, an abusive religious environment, an adverse religious environment, whatever term you use. The idea is that they take away our ability to think for ourselves. They tell us what to think. And when we leave, we have to take the initiative to challenge beliefs ourselves. And we can only challenge that through new information. So they control the information that came in. We have to control it with the new information. I learned through history. So I started picking up books on history on all these different groups. That's how I learned. But whether you listen to a podcast or you join a group, go visit a temple of some other faith. If you have, you know, fears or concerns, you know, I don't want to put any person in an unsafe position. So make sure you do your research before. If you need help finding an affirming place, you can reach out to the Vashti Initiative. We will help you find an affirming place. Or just try something new. If you don't know, read and learn about it. Put yourself out there, because it really is. That's the thing about healing. It's not my fault what happened to me, but it is on me to take charge of my healing. And so I can only do that by, again, adding new information, bringing new information in. That's how I did it.
Thank you.
Only thing I would add to that, I'd agree with all of it, but just like stay skeptical about things. Keep an open mindset, but at the same time, pay attention to the tools that you're using to actually come to the conclusions you're coming to, because those are the real important things that I've found. Like when it comes to actual morals or anything and ethics, I think it comes down to like the logic and reasoning you have behind those things and how you're processing those or implementing those in the things around you. Your epistemology is most important thing. So yeah, focusing on those things and always trying to learn more, and that's always a good thing to implement whenever it comes to these, especially when it comes to like trying to talk to people about this stuff, because it's hard to do.
Yeah.
It is. They're difficult
Thank you.
conversations.
They're very difficult conversations. And thank you, Evan. And thank you, Slew. And thank you, Ryan. I would echo what Evan and Ryan and Slew all shared. But I would also I'd like to invite you to be curious. And part of what I mean when I say that is when there is this thing called confirmation bias. When we look for certain things, that's what we're going to find. And it's going to confirm our bias. And when we look for a more open-minded approach, we are open to receiving new information. We can't be open to receiving new information if I say that, for example, all trans people are bad. If I were to say that and I were to Google trans people are bad, I'm going to get confirmation bias.
Excellent point.
Okay. But when I say be curious, what I'm saying is, and what I'm talking about is like taking an internal look at, why am I doing this? What am I doing? And where did that belief come from? Why do I think that it's okay to go through the world and like tell people what to do, or look at people and say that they're bad because, for example, they're trans? Because I'm here to tell you, trans people are people too. They are human beings. They're worthy of human fucking rights.
And I had, the weird thing is, I had those bigoted thoughts and everything. Like, while I was still in religion, I thought those things, and here I am, you know, I was thinking about myself or whatever, but it's like, it's weird to think about that.
I had been out for almost 2 years. I was identifying as gay, but I was not ready to touch my gender identity at all. And I met this person who told me they were trans, and oh man, the negative emotions that came up in with me. I was disgusted. I was repulsed. I was all those things. And in that moment, I had that choice to do exactly what you said, Mary. Lean into it and be like, why am I feeling this way? Or I could have backed up in that moment and said, forget this. I don't want to know anything about this. These people are wrong. And that's what I had always been taught to do. So instead, you lean into that discomfort. And, you know, I found a lot more about myself than I was expecting to, but it all came from leaning in.
Learned a lot.
What was weird was I started getting into like street epistemology and like questioning things. It's based in like Socratic method. And I started like getting into these different groups, atheist groups and stuff that were more diverse and everything. And I'm like, well, I keep seeing on the atheist experience, for one, I was like, I keep seeing these people come on, they're talking about trans people and all of these rights and things and all of it, and it's not making sense to me. And this was after I'd kind of initially come out of religion. It was just I wasn't able to piece these things together because I had no idea that there was a difference between gender and biological sex or, you know, any of that.
Me either.
And I'm like, and yeah, like you said, there's that thing of you can either start honestly questioning things and not from a biased perspective and trying to just humiliate somebody, but from an actual, you know, honest perspective and figure out why. Or you can just double down on your ignorance and like just stay that way. But I'd finally decided, I'm like, okay, I'm going to just, everything that I know or whatever, or that I think I know, I'm going to set to the side. And I want to know where the evidence is for this stuff, because these are people that are supposed to be science-based, you know, thinking and everything. What's going on here? And I went into just their Discord server and I said, you know, and I was like so awkward about it. And I'm like, I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm sure you guys get this all the time or whatever, but I'm just like, I honestly want to know what's up with this thing. What is there's a gender and sex or something or whatever, and why, what's going on here? And people came in, and there was the nicest people in the fucking world came in and just explained it to me because I wasn't being a dick. I was honestly asking a question.
Slew.
And I got honest feedback out of it.
I will give
and I
you
learned
your
something.
honest
Like,
feedback. When you first came out to me as being non-binary, it was when you were so terrified and awkward. But I was
yeah,
honored to hold that for you. So thank you.
That's awesome.
And I'm
That's
really
awesome.
glad you got to like
yeah,
experience like that feedback. And again, be curious, people. Y'all are human
Mhm.
beings worthy of human rights, and you get to choose how you want to live your lives. And your lives are things that should actually bring you joy and happiness in life, and you deserve happiness. And I want to thank all of our guests once again for the great conversation. We're going to see about maybe having one more of these because I really love this
Because I have
conversation.
questions now. I
And
have more questions.
exactly, like it's wild, right? Like where,
Yeah. While we're
yeah.
talking, I'm like, okay, I actually have more
Now I
questions
have
now.
more
So
questions. Now
yeah.
but yeah, that's part of me is like I get curious, I ask questions, also, sometimes you really need to go and look up information rather than asking or expecting somebody to answer it for you. So there is that. Regardless, thank you for being a part of this conversation. Thank you to our Patreon subscribers and the Misfit Amish again. And thank you again, all of you, for this fantastic time. Have a good Sunday.